Could you talk about how that was a logical progression at Bruce Power to go from records to then the broader view of more content to having
Yeah.
that view of records?
Records perspective and being the custodian, obviously from the records, you want to be able to have traceability and ensure that you've only got, like a one single controlled copy of something, and that, that helps you from an e-discovery legal and then of course regulatory license perspective. Within the business services, the biggest daunting thing that I had in my head from an exposure perspective was all of those potentially records or controlled docs that might be sitting in people's common shares or the H drive that just quite honestly shouldn't be there. Because when you're the records officer, you need to be draconian about making sure that you're holding that record and only a single copy of that record. So made our transition from Passport, which was our old enterprise asset management system, into the new Maximo. The Passport had like proprietary code, and what we had contracted with a company to extract all of these OLE documents, so these these objects that the system was creating, and convert those for us into like a Word document, so we could see what was in there, what had business value, and that's where that number 15 million comes from. It was pretty overwhelming. We're like, oh my god, it's like 15 million Word documents, and I mean, you can't pay an army of people to go through that in a reasonable amount of time to be able to figure out what has business value. And then of course that's when we knocked on your door. And what we saw very, very quickly, the discovery of what those documents were, we found out that a big chunk of them were actually just duplicate documents that we wouldn't have known otherwise. And then when we started to peel the onion back on that, found out that those were empty documents that had zero business value, probably about 75% of that 15 million. Again, we wouldn't have known. We probably would have been in a situation where we just somehow figured out how to migrate all that garbage into our new system. So I mean, don't need to tell anyone garbage in, garbage out, but it was pretty compelling when we found out and started digging in that really only 3 million of those documents had any kind of business value for us. Fast forward, we talk about the cut over to Maximo. Once we got through that, we were able to see the real power of the tool, and like that's when we started the juices flowing. Like, what else could we do? We've got all this dark data in our H and G drives. How can we actually use this to discover and make some good business decision about what is important and what isn't? Looking at that much data is just insurmountable, really, and of course we're constrained, like any organization, by the resources that we got to be able to do any kind of interrogation, and that's where the Shinydocs tool was able to do that in a very short period of time. Tell us what was in those common shares.